But I want to get this panel started. So today, just as a little side, we've got a bunch of great panelists here. We have, just to kind of give everyone an update as we get started here. If you're interested in typing in questions, we will have time for Q&A at the end. But if you want to use, we're going to use Slido. So scan this QR code. You can enter in questions during the panel, and your question may get answered as part of the Q&A as well. So if there's a question that pops up in your mind, feel free to ask it. All right. So today, I think we start with this, right? Collectively, our world is concerned with reducing emissions, right? Virtually all sectors and industries are working towards this. The dairy community has a role to play, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. But for farmers to embrace like those farm management decisions in order to reduce emissions, research is needed and good data is needed. This closing panel focuses on an 8-year multi-state, multi-stakeholder project supported by the major brands and developed through the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. The project aims to close research gaps, empower farmers in their decision-making, and set the stage for new market opportunities, incentives, and investments in dairy sustainability. And that's what this really is about, dairy sustainability. With that said, I'd like to introduce our first panelist to offer some background on the project. After that, you'll hear from the other panelists, and I will serve as moderator. So our first presenter is Reza Afshar. He's the principal investigator and overall project lead for Dairy Management, Inc. He provides strategic leadership and oversees the project direction, research initiatives, and ensures that the project remains aligned with the dairy industry needs. At DMI, Reza serves as the Vice President for Soil, Feed, and Water Research. Prior to DMI, he held roles with the Rodale Institute and Colorado State University and completed a postdoc at Montana State. Please help me welcome Reza Afshar.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, allow me to say what a fantastic event this symposium has been so far. Kudos to Dairy Innovation Hub. So Dairy Soil and Water Regeneration Project, or DSWR. What is it? So in 2020, dairy industry, including farmers, food supply, companies, industry stakeholders, came together and set some voluntary environmental stewardship goals, which include achieving greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050, optimizing water use on the farm, and improving water quality through better utilization of manure and nutrient. To support those goals, multiple initiatives were launched, and one of the largest one was Dairy Soil and Water Regeneration Project. DSWR, as Matt mentioned, is a multi-state, multi-institution project that received $10 million grant from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. An additional fund come from corporate like Nestle and Starbucks, Nutrient, and also Dairy Checkoff. The project involved multiple institutions, including Soil Health Institute, which is co-leading the project, 7 universities, USDA ARS, and multiple farmers. So the main aspect of the project is comparing and evaluating how advanced soil health systems impact key agronomic and environmental outcomes of dairy feed production. Specifically, we are focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, water quality outcomes, soil health, soil carbon sequestration, and also agronomic and productivity factors. So this map is showing where our research partners are located. Some of them are here today, and some are not, but overall, we have established 17 research trials across 6 major dairy producing states. So it's a comprehensive project with a lot of partners and participants. We have developed 3 major tasks for this project. Task 1 was conducting a comprehensive survey of baseline soil health and soil carbon storage on dairy farms. Overall, 93 farmers participated in this work, and we got a good understanding of the status of soil health and soil carbon storage on these dairy farms. Our SHI team right now is running those data through models to see what we can find. Task 2 is where we have our scientifically rigorous field research trials that we are focusing on different aspects of the soil management and nutrient management. And task 3 is dedicated to communication, outreach, and modeling. And with help from our university partners, we are developing programs and outcomes so we can deliver the project outcomes to stakeholders in an effective manner. Before I pass it to Matt, this is the website of the project. If you want to learn more about the project details and the scope, please feel free to reach out to them.
Excellent. Right, and so we've got this is the basis for what to kind of benchmark what we're going to focus on today. Is this project, parts of the project, and then extending the results of this project. The idea of what's next. So with that, we're gonna go to each panelist to give a little introduction. They've each got a slide and can give a little introduction to themselves and their part of the project.
Great. So I'm Gregg Sanford. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Soil and Environmental Sciences, and one of the co-PIs on the UW-Madison side of things. And we have one slide to explain what we do. So I cheated, and I have one slide with animations to explain what we do. But kind of as Reza mentioned, this combination of kind of what I would consider to be maybe more old school cropping systems work in terms of building kind of soil health management systems, coupled with maybe a more technological approach, looking at novel manure products and the biogeochemical, agronomic, et cetera, impacts of those products. And so in Wisconsin, we have 3 intensive field research sites that are at the Arlington Ag Research Station. There is also a large farm research site, participant up near Green Bay. But just to look at what we have at Arlington, we have 3 principal studies. In each one of them, I should say in 2 of them, we have this idea of kind of a business as usual dairy forage system with corn silage, where we've got tillage and liquid dairy manure. And then we have kind of a suite of advanced soil health management, cover cropping, planting green, going no-till, using these novel manure products. And in these systems, we're kind of tracking different things. So one of them is specifically a systems project to look at these different manure products and their impact on greenhouse gas emissions, soil carbon, et cetera. Another one is really looking at how our management practices impact specific water or hydrological aspects of these fields. And then because we're working with these novel manure products, a third one is actually looking at kind of the nutrient replacement capacity of some of them relative to dairy manure and fertilizer. So just quickly, we've got kind of old school manure, liquid dairy manure, and we have these 2 new products. One of them is an evaporative solid, and the other one is a flocculated solid. We're looking at agronomic performance, so yields, some of the other agronomic pieces, like how good are we at getting cover crops established and how much biomass are they adding. Of course, tracking the environmental components from the standpoint of temperature, oxygen, water. And then here, this is a ERGA, an infrared gas analyzer measuring trace gases, looking at saturated hydraulic conductivity in these systems, and ultimately tracking many of the biogeochemical pieces in deep carbon. And I should just say that we have this fantastic field team that makes all of this happen, and these are their beautiful pictures.
All right, thank you, Gregg.
I think I'm
on to Dennis Busch.
Oh, you're on?
good. Yes, very good. Thank you, Gregg. So you get a gold star for finding a workaround to our 1 slide rule, which I didn't even think of that, so I have 1 slide. Again, my name is Dennis Busch. I'm at the University of Wisconsin, Platteville. Pioneer Farm. Our site, somewhat different than what Gregg's using, is experimental design, and that one of our primary focuses is looking at water quality, edge of field surface water runoff, as well as leachate going through the soil profile. So in the photograph behind me, you can see our setup of edge of field monitoring basins, those little white buildings set at the edge of these small catchments. The catchments are about an acre in size a piece, and you can see some difference in color across the different catchments. Half of those are the business as usual, which for us is corn silage production with liquid manure, injection, tillage, and no cover crop. And then also urea for additional fertilizer needs. The aspiration or the soil health management system, we're using a no-till system. Cover crops are established in the fall. We're using a manure-based product called LWR. And then if additional N is needed, we apply that using a pre-side dress N test. So we're also monitoring greenhouse gas emissions, collecting data or samples for soil health measurements as well. I think we're all collecting these similar set of metrics in that regard. But what sets our site and Vermont apart, I think, is the water quality data that we're collecting. So I'll turn it over to Joshua.
All right, thanks, Dennis. Joshua Faulkner, I'm a research associate professor at the University of Vermont. Let me get there. There we go. Good to be here in Wisconsin, another dairy state. I don't know if it's true, but they say in Vermont that no state is more dependent upon one single commodity than Vermont is upon dairy. And I've never seen any data to support that, but it is about 75% of our ag sales, so it's a really important part of our ag sector. And thanks to Gregg and Dennis for really setting this up. We're evaluating many of the same practices, the no-till, the cover cropping, and the manure injection versus a business as usual. So I won't talk much about that, but I did want to just kind of frame our site with a little bit more context for some of the challenges that we're facing. I think there's kind of two gorillas in the room when you think about Vermont dairy systems. And to start, I want you to look at the left there. So we have that's the border between New York and Vermont, and we have this Lake Champlain that occupies part of that border. And the yellow on that map is our agriculture. That's where all of our farms are located. And so you might imagine there's going to be some water quality issues associated with that, with all of those farms tucked up right against the lake. And we do have a TMDL on that lake for phosphorus. And that's a big driver for a lot of the work we do and the work we're doing as part of this project. And so the other issue is really climate change and increased frequency of extreme events. And there's an image of one of our cornfields in the middle at the top from summer of 2023. It looked like that probably 2 months out of the year. We saw over 20 inches of rain just in July and August of that year. And we're located on a lot of our farms in the valley are on very heavy clay soils. And if you look at the lower right corner of the screen, that's my foot beside those soils. And those soils are shrink swell, so they crack open. We have this preferential flow, which then will end up in tile drains. And tile drains are going in very rapidly as a result of climate change. And so we have this collision of these water quality challenges and the effects of climate change, and that's driving a lot of our work. And then a picture of one of our filter structures that we're trying to capture or remove phosphorus from tile drain flow, which hopefully I'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about later. I'll pass it on to Cristine.
Thank you. Oh, it changed my fonts after all. Okay, so yeah, my fonts are changed just like the speakers this morning. I'm Cristine Morgan. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at the Soil Health Institute. I graduated from UW with my PhD in 2023, so I'm a Badger, even though I come to you today from North Carolina. So the job of the Soil Health Institute with this whole project was to imagine what it should look like put together the experimental design and then convince all these scientists that you see up here to engage with us and find places to do the work and agree to do the work. It's a lot of work. I'll get into that later. But anyway, our big role was helping with the experimental design. We help with the data collection in that we don't collect much of it, but we're kind of in charge of making sure that it's all data-based and searchable and curated, which is a pretty big job, considering the variety of data being collected, from greenhouse gas data to soil data to water data. It's big. And then we just wanted to try to maintain some consistency across sites, which you can imagine is pretty hard in agriculture because there's nothing consistent about soils and ag systems across all of the United States. And then, but the really fun thing and the part that's my signature on this project is the on-farm survey that Reza talked about. We wanted to know, what do dairy soils look like? How much carbon? What do the soil health indicators look like? And then, in the dairies that have adopted soil health management practices, do those indicators look different? And if so, what were the practices that made them look different? And so that was the big data collection component that we did. And New York, Wisconsin, 2 places in Wisconsin. Wisconsin got special treatment. We did the driftless area and that area above Green Bay. We call it the Eastern Shore, but I don't know what Wisconsinites call it. And we did Texas and New Mexico, Idaho. And so we really tried to hit the target, the high population cow dairy centers.
Excellent. Right.
Forward it?
Maybe forward one slide. Just make sure the QR code. There
Okay.
we go. Perfect. All right. So drawing the thread again. So this is all about dairy sustainability, really around the idea of practices as it relates to manure management, cover crop use, other conservation practices, and then the ultimate effects on greenhouse gas emissions, soil carbon, and soil health, right? So that's kind of the thread that's kind of the thread that kind of runs through this whole group. Although I should also mention water quality, right? So water quality as well. Okay, so let's start with the big question, right? So maybe this question might be a good one for Reza to start. Can you elaborate more on the environmental sustainability goals that dairy has, and how are things progressing? Are things moving in the right direction?
Yeah, dairy industry is making a substantial progress. So when these goals were set, we made commitment to release a progress report every 5 years, and the first report's coming out in 2025. The most recent nationwide life cycle assessment that was done and published a few days ago, actually, in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology, and that study is showing that from 2007 to 2020, milk production increased 28%, and emission intensity, means emission per gallon of milk, reduced by 13%. So it's showing that today, dairy farmers are producing more milk with fewer resources and much smaller environmental impact. So the same applies about water. How much water is used for producing each gallon of milk? There is a substantial improvement too. So overall, I think the progress that dairy farmers are making significant progress toward a more sustainable.
Excellent. So then the question for you and maybe for the bigger group. So progress is being made, but what are the gaps, right? So what are the missing pieces in our understanding that'll like top this off to really complete the goals? Where do you see as the big gaps?
I'm going to jump in quickly just to throw one of the gaps. I think Joshua pointed out really well, kind of nutrient cycling, nutrient loss. So certainly, we're talking a lot about soil biogeochemistry, but when we talk about carbon and soil structure, we're talking about soils that can hold on to those nutrients, cycle those nutrients. And so I think a big gap is finding ways to grow a bunch of crops near Lake Champlain or grow a bunch of crops in Columbia and Dane County around the Yahara River watershed and tighten those nutrient cycles up. hold on to phosphorus, maintain nitrogen, and these soil health practices. And theoretically, these manure products could all be part of that solution.
Building on what Greg mentioned, I just want to mention something. As we hear today, missing data, and one of the main goal of this project was to produce scientifically robust data that farmers can use to make informed and confident decisions. Because the ultimate goal is that farmers find a way they can adopt these conservation practices, and they need this regionally relevant data and information to make informed decisions, because any change comes with, they need to be confident that a specific practice, that a specific technology work for the specific condition, climate, soil, farming system. And studies like DSWR and a lot of other studies that we heard about today is really hoping to fill that knowledge gap.
Excellent. So there's some management things that we might need to figure out, but also that regional data is a big piece. Gregg, you mentioned these manure products, and novel manure products are a big part of the study. It's perhaps one technology. Can you elaborate a little more? Can you tell us a little bit more about those products?
I will do my best. Part of the issue with modern dairies and liquid dairy manure is that it's a very heavy product. It's very heterogeneous. It's hard to get kind of moving around on the landscape to fields that might need it. And many farms are looking at technological ways to deal with that. And a couple of them are to try and separate the liquid phase from the solid phase, whether it's an evaporative separation, which is what our product Cedron that we're using is, or a flocculated separation, which is the LWR product that was mentioned earlier, to try and concentrate phosphorus and many of the other kind of key immobile nutrients in a physical product that we can move around theoretically easily, and perhaps a grain farmer who doesn't have livestock could actually use a product like that. But also concentrate the liquid nutrients. So for Cedron, there's even a second step, which is to take the liquid phase and create actually a ammonium nitrate, a liquid ammonium nitrate that, because of the way it's processed, could theoretically even be used on an organic farm. So trying to make these nutrients easier to put where we need to be putting them.
So it's about, there's different technologies to separate it. There's a flocculation technology, and what was the first one again?
It's an evaporative. I'm sure there's others.
So like two different technologies. And then maybe just for the bigger group, have we started to notice that there's any benefit or any differences between the products, the end products of these technologies, or just the liquid solid separation in general? Where are we at with that? Where are the potential benefits?
I know. I'll jump in. I think for us, I think it's a little early in our study to say what the effect is going to be on soil health from these products. And we use a dissolved air flotation technology in Vermont, and we use the solids out of that, and that's part of one of our treatments. But I did want to follow on what Gregg said. I know that I think these are critical, and just emphasize his point that, like, in our watersheds where we have a lot of legacy phosphorus that's building up in our soils, and we're pretty much to the tipping point in many of our soils in Vermont, that these technologies, and disclaimer, I'm an engineer, so of course I love these things, but I think these are going to just be really critical to address water quality as we see watersheds start to hit this tipping point, and creating a product. Our technology removes 85% of the phosphorus from the manure to get that manure in a transportable form and get it out of the watershed.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I think from the perspective of the data that we've been seeing, these manure products are part of a system, right? We're not testing those individually. We're looking at those as part of a system that reduces tillage. We have cover crops. So the soil health management system as compared to our conventional system. The conventional system is a lot more tillage, all right, growing corn silage as well. So in the fall, there's not much cover, not much residue. And we are seeing, it's preliminary data, we have a couple years of data, but we are seeing significant differences in load for soil and for nutrients at the edge of field sites. We're seeing significantly more infiltration on the soil health management sites as compared to the business as usual. So we're seeing changes. The data, it's early in the data.
Sure.
But it is, it allows you maybe to reduce the amount of tillage that you're doing on the dairy systems. I think there's a lot of pressure to inject and incorporate manure on liquid dairy manure systems. And a lot of different ways to do that. But in some instances, if you're using aggressive tillage and aggressive toolbar to get the manure in, that sets you up for additional required tillage in order to get the seedbed prepped for the following year. So it can be pretty risky if you have 2-3 passes of tillage, corn silage, without using cover crops, as compared to being able to have a product that maybe allows you to apply without doing much incorporation, if any.
So then what I'm hearing is the manure technologies around the idea of liquid solid separation are a key, and I don't know if I want to go this far, but is it an essential part of dairy sustainability? Is that where we're at? We have these conservation practices, but we also need this level of manure management.
I would propose
handling.
they might be enabling technologies, right? Because we know the soil where we want to go with soil health management to improve water quality and water cycling and nutrient cycling. And this gives us another tool, as Dennis was saying, so that maybe we can push further towards the soil health management system and not be required to do other things because of the type of manure we have to apply.
It definitely feels like a tool in a toolkit. You know, there's certainly significant capital investment to produce these products, and so thinking about the economic model that will make them accessible, I think is tricky. One of the things that we've seen at Arlington is that, you know, most of the changes in soil health or trace gas emissions are primarily associated with the changes in tillage and cover cropping, which is not surprising, and that the agronomic pieces, the yield pieces, are equivalent, right? We know how to kind of manage nutrients, and we can produce the same type of silage. And so in my mind, that's a kind of a great positive if we can do what we can do with liquid manure, but we're doing it with a product that's potentially much more feasible to move. It's a win.
And a quick follow-up then, what is the energy requirement of this? Is this something that's going to create other issues when looking at carbon balances, or is this a fairly efficient process? I don't know if we have any.
Yeah, the two technologies you're using, the dissolved air flotation, is efficient. It doesn't need a lot of energy, and the other one, which we call it evaporative solid, they come from Ruark or Cedron system. It has a closed loop, so it's efficient in using energy. And most of these are either installed before digester or after digester, so a source of energy can come from it.
Oh, excellent. All right, so let's put a pin in manure. It's fun to talk about manure, it is, but it's more fun to talk about soil. So the next question is, let's talk a little bit about soil health. All right, soil health and dairy systems, go. Are dairy systems good or bad for soil health?
Go ahead.
I would just say they present risks and opportunities, maybe to start with. Did I just steal your
That was
line?
a perfect academic answer. Like, it
It
depends.
depends.
Yeah.
I used to work in extension. Every answer is it depends. That's the first answer. But specifically, I think with the system producing a lot of corn silage, and with that, we're obviously harvesting the entire plant in the fall of the year. So now we have bare ground, no cover, which can be a risk. We've seen that in the data, increasing soil erosion, increasing runoff. On the other hand, the timing of that harvest is usually earlier in the fall, which allows us enough heat and growing degree day units that we can establish, a cover crop, typically many years, that will provide some cover through that fall and growing crop through the winter, and also be available in the spring as well. So in my opinion, that's the one observation.
And I guess I would say, like, our system in this study is not optimized. We're trying to control some of the variability, so we're working with corn silage, but if you think about kind of the concepts of soil health management or ecological intensification, dairy systems have the potential to check many of those boxes off. We have perennial forages, we have legumes fixing atmospheric nitrogen, we have integrated crop livestock systems. So in my mind, many of the pieces, if not all of the pieces we need to build soil health, reduce compaction, increase infiltration and structure, they're there. I don't know that we always do a fantastic job of it, but they're there. And so theoretically, I would bank on a dairy forage rotation over a corn soybean rotation in terms of its ability to move in that direction any day.
Okay, I can speak to the data from farms. So we surveyed farms that were in the driftless area, and then dairy farms that were in the northeastern part, north of Green Bay in Wisconsin. And what we did at each of these areas that we surveyed, we first started talking with farmers and found out, like, what is the cropping systems for dairy look like here? And after a couple of interviews, what we could figure out is, like, this is what business as usual looks like. This is what soil health management systems look like in this region, in these dairies. And then what we tried to find even is, like, where are the soils that are being manured that we expect to express the greatest soil health indicators, right? So we have 3 categories of management, kind of the baseline, some improvement, and the best. And interestingly, the best, based on our interviews and the principles that Gregg just talked about, is we know those are rotationally grazed pastures, and they definitely had the greatest soil health. And of course, it was all the reasons that Gregg talked about, which is they have continuous living roots, they are not disturbed as much, they are still manured by cattle grazing them, and they're just they're in the best shape of all of our dairy management systems. The other things that we found is that farmers that do rotate alfalfa in with their row crops are more likely to grow cover crops, and again, then they are more likely to have greater soil health indicators. So the numbers are better. The most interesting thing we found, so one of the things we have to recognize in this survey, so the Soil Health Institute, we do this kind of survey across a lot of farms across the U.S. I think we've hit close to 1,000 now. And most of the systems that we measure are not manured. And dairy represents a very specific situation where it's manured. And so one of the things that we know is that when you apply manure or organic matters and nutrients to the soil through organic matter, like manure, is that it really raises the soil health indicators above that of cropping systems that do not add manure. So I think that agrees with what Gregg was just saying, that dairy systems have a real potential to contribute to soil health through the manure issue. But the very interesting thing is we looked at the effect of living roots, which would be alfalfa and cover cropping, and the effect of decreased tillage. And for Wisconsin, we found that the farmers that increased their living roots, they had a more positive impact on soil health than those that had decreased tillage. That is not what we find in non-manured row crop systems, but I think one of the reasons why is in dairy harvest systems, there's a lot of weight on the soil, and so these soils are naturally quite compacted. And so the tillage has less influence on soil structure than just like the weight of equipment going over it. Therefore, living roots, their impact on improved soil health were much more heightened than in row crop systems. So yes, the soil health management systems are working on dairies. If you can, graze. And if you can't, just try to increase the living roots as much as possible. So that's cover cropping and alfalfa.
So grow more alfalfa.
Cover crop.
And cover crops. Excellent. There was a lot of discussion this morning, or there was a lot of mention about the competitive advantage of dairy in Wisconsin is that we have water. It rains here. And I know for Dennis and Josh, water cycling, water quality is a big part of your research. Can you touch on a little more on the role of dairy management and water?
Yes. So, I mean, it's, I think, fairly obvious to everybody that how we manage our systems impact the hydrology. And we're seeing that, with this system as well. The cover crops, the reduced tillage, make a big difference on runoff from these systems, storage, infiltration, which is pretty critical. Now, it's not a silver bullet. We see if you're not, paying close attention and managing the system, you can also have a negative impact. So you go back and look at our weather over the last few years. So 2023 for us was pretty dry. I think between April 15th through July 15th, I think we were like 8 inches below our annual, for that time frame. So in that situation where we had left cover crops growing and terminated late, we did see that we not only grew a lot of cover crop, but we harvested a lot of water, and there's a lot of ET. So we did see in some of the, not in this project, but other projects where we had reduced yields in that situation. Then go forward another year, last year, and we had pretty much the opposite in precip, in that between April and July, we were over by 8 inches in that time frame. So, driving through southwest Wisconsin in the glaciated area, you saw a lot of fields with some pretty significant erosion problems that were, tillage, no cover crop. So I think we can hold more water on the landscape using the reduced tillage and cover crops, increased interception, increased storage, increased infiltration, which is a big benefit when we're seeing our precip patterns changing like they are. But at the same time, we have to be watching that we're not removing too much water from the soil profile with the cover crops if we are in a more droughty condition.
Yeah, I really appreciated the keynote's comment this morning that we will have that advantage in the northern humid states. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's just a matter of we have to learn how to manage that water. And we're not quite there yet, but these soil health practices are really, I think, a critical piece of that. Building structured soils that will drain and handle this excess moisture, that are resistant to compaction. Looking at tools like tile, which we've seen increase in Vermont. I just talked to Dennis. He said he's seen it up where he is. It's really going in. These are tools, but they are also a liability from a water quality standpoint. And I think it's really important for us to think about those tools to manage water, and think about how we deal with the water quality impacts of those tools at the same time. And we've been, as part of this project, we've been investigating phosphorus filter structures at tile outlets, things like that I think are going to be, that we've seen to be very effective, are going to be important. They're not going to be for every farm, but I think they're going to be really important to use on some of our worst case situations.
Excellent. All right, so we gathered, we're all gathered here because we're all part of the DSWR project. I want to get your thoughts here as we've talked about a lot of parts of it. But I want you to think, how's the project going? And are there pieces of it, are there some other pieces, are there some other novel pieces that we haven't touched on here today? Any other things we should be highlighting? And how's it going? You got to answer that question first.
Yeah, I'll start with I think it's going quite well. We just recently we created a data brief of the high quality data that has been curated through this project, and the numbers were remarkable. I mean, we have across the United States in these so New York, Wisconsin, Texas, Idaho, and California, we have data on gas emissions, we have data on soil deep carbon, soil shallow carbon, soil health indicators, and we have agronomic data, and coupled with all this management data. So it's a lot of data. And one of the things that we are trying to do is now use this data in our modeling. We have part of this project that we have not mentioned today is we have a modeling advisory committee. And these are like the common models that are used to estimate like what are the ecosystem services from these soil health practices and manure. And so we have a highly motivated modeling crew now that as the data is curated, they can jump in and start figuring out how well their models are reckoning with soil health practices and different manure systems. So I think it's exciting. I like it.
I think it is too. I agree.
How do you think it's going, Reza?
Yeah, I agree. I think project is progressing very well. So as you can imagine, executing project of this scale can has its own challenges. We have so many moving pieces, but I think project is progressing very well. And really, the ultimate goal of this project was support development of new carbon and water markets for dairy farmers. And these are critical because they provide financial incentives for the farmers that let them implement these conservation practices. So basically, they deliver environmental benefit while still remain profitable and productive. So a project like this project, by producing, as Cristine mentioned, massive database will be really, really useful for developing such new markets.
And I would add to that too. I think it's been mentioned, but I just reiterate it: the fact that there's a lot of data being collected across the wide geographic area, but it's the consistency in that data collection that's probably the most important part, which is really important because it's very hard to go back in time and try to reorganize data that are collected through disparate programs, right?
Yep.
You're shaking your head. So the proactive from the beginning and incrementally, I would say monthly, we're meeting and discussing methods, data, is going to make a big difference too in creating a really nice foundational data set.
I was just going to say that there were some early hiccups. Like, I don't know if I have the same recollection of the experimental design that Cristine does, but you know, the water under the bridge, I feel like we worked through a lot of those early hiccups.
Salty researchers is what I would say.
We worked through a lot of those hiccups, and I will also say, starting off, I was nervous about doing a project where it was like academics working with industry, and it's been awesome working with DMI. They've made it really clear, like, we're in it for the best data we can generate. We're not in it to be spin doctors or anything like that. And so I just think it's been really great, like, getting to the point where we've all hammered out these issues and are collecting amazing data and learning a lot from each other. And, yeah.
No, that's great. I'd encourage us all to do more work with industry. All right, so we got a bunch of great questions coming in. So I agree. I think this project is a huge success, and I'm glad that everyone got to highlight their favorite parts. Couple questions now. These are kind of bigger picture questions I want to pose here. So maybe a question: How do you guys feel about how receptive farmers are specifically to reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
I can. Go ahead.
Are they just forced to? Yeah.
I was gonna answer a different question.
No.
Which is just to say that we have several on-farm projects looking at like soil carbon and soil health, which is directly related. It's just the kind of inverse of, and the farmers engaged in that are super excited and interested about it, and not from like any kind of like. It's mostly from, like, people are telling us a lot of stuff about greenhouse gases and soil carbon and phosphorus, and like, I kind of don't believe any of it. So we're thrilled to work with you and get our hands on like real data, which has been pretty exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, most of the farmers are really proactive and genuinely interested in reducing emissions. But the fact is that solutions are not one size fits all. So they need to exactly know what works for them and what doesn't work. And they also don't like to be told what to do. So this project and many other projects, they are really designed in a way to provide options and give them just tools that they need to make the decisions that works for them. But they're really, really interested in these topics. And as I said, the goals I mentioned, they are set voluntarily. There are not any push or any regulation that mandate them.
Now, that one-size-fits-all comment, I think, leads into this next question about what are the challenges that each of you are you seeing in terms of the actual implementation of these sustainable practices? What do you see as the issues for why something may not be implemented?
I can speak to my experiences on like one-on-one interactions with some of the farmers that we've cooperated with. And it's a perspective that I had not had, having previously not worked with dairies and primarily worked with commodity crops. And that was when we were speaking with the dairy farmers. First of all, the owner farmer is, sometimes and most often not the agronomist. They have a highly integrated business operation and usually have hired agronomists, which is different a lot of times with the other farmers we work with. They're making more agronomy decisions. But the thing that really struck me that I think makes it really hard is they're feeding animals. And that really struck me because I grew up on a cow-calf operation. I know what it means to, be concerned about feeding your animals. And when someone talks about changing a practice, then there's this risk associated with the question of will I still be able to feed all these animals? And I have mouths to feed, and if I can't feed them, I've got to buy it. And what is it going to cost? And to me, that really elevated the risk, and also, just understanding that when a dairy farmer does change their practices, that there's a lot in that, and there's a very huge commitment associated with it. Because at the end of the day, you have to feed the cows. They have to eat. So that was my perspective. So I think it's a little harder than it is for, commodity row crop systems. That's just my perspective that I learned from this project.
I think that's fair. And we'll take it, if there is time for one or two questions from the audience, if anyone has a question to ask. Anyone else wanted to follow up on other issues that you see in terms of adoption? But otherwise, we can go into.
I would just add one other thing too. We were talking about our practices in terms of cover crop, no cover crop, reduced tillage, but they're not like a single decision. So if you decide, well, I'm going to do cover crops, well, what does that mean? Are you going to establish cover crops in fall? Well, what cover crops are you going to establish? How are you going to establish them? What's the seeding rate? Are they going to winter terminate, or do you have to terminate them in the spring? If you terminate in the spring, are you going to do it before planting, or after planting? So it's not just a single decision, but there's a lot of, once you start going down those practices, there's a lot of things to consider.
A lot of moving parts. That's a good point. All right, question.
Yeah, this is a fairly specific question. I was interested in knowing what types of gases do you monitor for coming out of the soil? Thanks.
The three principal ones we're tracking are carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is what we're focusing the most on. Most aerobic soils in this part of the world, so soils with sufficient oxygen, are actually consuming methane. So instead of methane coming up, it's going in. And then CO2 gets tricky because carbon dioxide is produced by autotrophs and heterotrophs. So the crops are producing CO2 through respiration. It's coming up from the roots. So it's hard to separate the CO2 coming out of a soil from carbon that's being chewed up by microbes versus carbon that's just being pumped in through a plant and then back out the soil. So we measure all three of them, but we focus primarily on nitrous oxide, which is a more potent greenhouse gas.
Any questions from the audience? All right, well, I appreciate the panel today. I think the big thing is we have a bunch of cool work. I'm going to put this one back up just in case anyone, go through Gregg's 15 animations. But remember, right, dairysoilwater.org. Check that out to learn more. Updates will be provided there. What's the big takeaway? Sustainability goals, we're moving forward. We need more data collection. That's what this is going to be about.
We need more systems-based research, data collection.
More systems-based research. Dairy systems will tend to have a more positive effect on soil health compared to a traditional row crop. But we also have all these other things in play. But it's also going to look like we are going to have to rely on some technology, as well as even just good old-fashioned traditional conservation practices.
And honestly, dairy is really leading the way in developing a more sustainable food system.
Excellent way to end it. Help me in thanking our panelists.